Hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the Northern Institute's People Policy Place Seminar Series. My name's Katrina Britnell and I'm the Partnerships Coordinator at Northern Institute. Firstly, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. For Northern Institute in Darwin, it is the Larrakia people. We pay our respects to Larrakia elders past, present and emerging, and further extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. This afternoon we have research-focused lecturer Dr. Johanna Funk presenting for us. With a PhD in Open Educational Practices with Indigenous Workforce Development, she is a curriculum designer and lecturer in cultural knowledge with the College of Indigenous Futures, Education and Arts here at Charles Darwin University. Today, Johanna will be presenting on how open ed practices with applied concepts of Indigenous knowledge can be cultivated to improve student engagement and facilitate deeper learning for more sustainable and caring outcomes. A quick note before I hand over to Johanna is we will be doing a Q&A session after the presentation. If you think of any questions, please put it in the Q&A bubble, which should be down the bottom of your screen. And yeah, welcome Johanna. I'm going to hand over to her now.
Thank you. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. And I'll move that over here. Okay, so my notes are over here, so that's just all I'm going to do. I'm just going to look over there to make sure I'm covering everything. As Katrina so eloquently put, my name's Johanna, and I teach in a core unit in first year called Cultural Capability at CDU. This presentation will discuss my emergent findings from a fellowship at the university, Open University in the UK, with the Global OER Graduate Network. There's a link on the final slide for this organization. It's a wonderful educational research organization and a really supportive community. So look out for that at the end. The main things I'll be talking about are what open practices are, their relationship to the digital literacies, and the emergent findings of what my PhD research has contributed to this and how I've kind of rolled on from my PhD into this fellowship and had an immediate impact on the teaching and learning here at CDU. Now I know Katrina's already acknowledged country. What I'd like to do is speak about this as a educational, relational learning practice that we do at the every lecture with students on campus, interstate, as well as offshore. So when we discuss traditional knowledge and traditional ownership, it's a chance for us to kind of shift cognitive gears and help us position ourselves in relation to the knowledge that's based in context of where we are. So it's not just a cultural protocol. Of course, it's a very significant and an important one, but to imbue it with more meaning and authenticity, I want to just acknowledge that we wouldn't be able to do this work without the relationships that the Northern Institute and our colleagues, long-standing colleagues at CDU have with traditional owners across Australia. We do this at the beginning of class, as I said, to situate ourselves and to respect the framework shared with us by the senior authorities that were involved in this work. A little bit of context, as you know, here we are at the top of Australia. The federal funding situation in Australian higher education should be a little bit of a common knowledge to some of you out there. However, our college, as the Education and Humanities College, has now kind of succumbed to a little bit of this. Double pricing of humanities, but teaching nursing science degrees have become a lot less expensive for Australian students. Not too sure if that's had a huge impact on enrollments yet, but there's also a job-ready agenda that's extending from compulsory schools up throughout TAFE and higher education. With the National Priority Industry Linkage Fund has listed co-creation of curriculum with industry as a huge measurable marker. CDU is a blended delivery institution with 70% of our students overall online. Many of those students are new to online learning, especially the ones who haven't studied in a really long time, which is a lot of our students, plus many international students. We've been restructuring across the colleges and across the institutes for a number of years now. And in the last couple of years, during which this research and this curriculum I'm going to be talking about was also during the COVID lockdowns, which comparably to the rest of the world weren't so dramatic. However, I don't want to underestimate the impact it had on our students in the significant 6 months that we've had issues with it. We've got about 20,000 students, 14% of which roughly are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Same percentage of international students, but I think I put that in quotation marks because it's a funny category for me for inclusion and inclusivity's sake, and because we're such a cosmopolitan country as it is. We have many multicultural domestic students that probably don't fit into that international category, but have been here for a number of years. So we've renovated this curriculum. This unit has about 500 students per semester. And so what we did when the business structure changed and moved this unit into the College of Indigenous Futures is that we sat down with Indigenous senior lecturers and senior authorities and used some of the practices from my PhD of open education to embed some more digital literacy and critical digital literacies into the program. So just a little bit of definitions. Digital literacies have been defined and most clearly kind of presented by the Joint Information Systems Committee from the UK, JISC. This involves not just ICT proficiency, but our digital citizenry and well-being, creation, innovation, scholarship, our ability to understand information and filter it and evaluate it. It's a huge implications for misinformation and fake news, as you might know. Digital learning and development, our ability to learn online, for example, which is a huge theme of this presentation and my research. But also what communication, collaboration, and participation in digital spaces might look like. This is a lot of overlap with open educational practices. Some people believe open educational practices are critical open educational resources are critical to being a part of open practices. Open resources employs Creative Commons licenses, down the bottom I've said there. These are digital resources that can be recycled, repurposed, remade, reshared, and retained by different institutions. So you're not reinventing the wheel as a teacher, but you're inviting students to participate in changing content, which isn't student-generated content, but it's more of a collaborative, communicative, developmental, innovative, and digital literacy kind of practice. So it kind of overlaps and complements with the digital literacies that I just mentioned there. Open educational practices are not just resource and license based. They are sometimes offline practices that you can open up, and as Cronin and McLaren say, multiple entry points. So in a way, it's a kind of a way of thinking about inviting different ideas and different understandings of knowledges into your practice. Whew. Right, so right quickly, if I can summarize my PhD research in the next few slides and how it contributes, there were a number of projects that I analyzed through my work, with the Northern Institute. They were all open in ontological ways. So this here, this bowerbird, is a kind of like a biodiversity Facebook, and this kind of gave people kind of an open access into traditional knowledge that Kathy Guthajaka, my supervisor, and I were working with. Pre-Vet was a Department of Education consultancy, and it was just kind of openly available resources, but it also showcased Indigenous role models in the Northern Territory in work positions and pathways, talking about workforce success. The Fisheries and Research Development Corporation did a training framework, and we made videos with traditional owners and participants in Aboriginal corporations on country, talking about how they can develop enterprise and meaningful business and employment on country. And the culturally secure engagement in plant biodiversity was with the CRC, talking about ways to open up the conversation of what biodiversity means in Australia to traditional owners of that country. So as I said, these were not license-bound or software or access-based open, but they were ontologically open in a number of different ways. The traditional knowledges need to be considered with a certain amount of care. Western ideas of openness and access to knowledge should be adjusted when it comes to culturally specific understandings of what openness means. So theoretically, the background of this was about knowledge, authority, and authorship. These are roles, people, practices, and deep connections between creation, country, and kinship, and knowledge is related to place. So you can refer to the knowledge authority, but also the ability of people to author their knowledge. Authentic consensus and collaboration, coming from a number of theorists underneath there, talking about, again, using that knowledge authority, understanding and respecting it, and exercising it, enabled to create more collaborative, authentic practices and understandings. Participation is also about locating knowledge in place and context, but also understanding the different interfaces between technology, institutional, industry, and traditional knowledge systems, and how they all kind of intersect together, and how do we make those places, digital or otherwise, more functional. So I was really interested in exploring that. So the way authorship can be done, for example, can open new dialogues. Resources can use different languages, like these fisheries videos use traditional languages to author aquaculture, skills and understandings for certificates in aquaculture and business development, for example. Gutta here down below talked about the seasons. She put the Yolngu seasons at the front and privileged that traditional knowledge and seasonal knowledge for the biodiversity sightings that she was authoring. Adjusting timing, how you can author and participate authentically in conversations that have to do with country management. Situating praxis is really important to embedding real meaning and real context mean things to people. So, for example, this is a man cutting up a kangaroo tail in the pre-vet resource. This would have been very familiar to a lot of students who live down the track. This is a lot more kind of motivating and relational when we think about context immersion for students and learners to be able to identify with the cultural backgrounds that they have, which Freire talks about authentic learning programs being not culturally evasive. Resources can make and keep knowledge on country and reclaim digital territory and resituate the dialogue between different stakeholders and users. And finally, there's Mayapa Vitia, transcending the cultural interface. We can not only meet in those cultural interfaces between those knowledge systems, but resources can actually speak to people and backgrounds and respect that traditional knowledge authority of where people are at. As you can see, Gutta here occupied the space for the nomenclature for biodiversity species with the whether it belonged to Yirracha or Dula clan. So there's ways that these occupying spaces in the digital sphere that enables people to take ownership of learning and transcend what happens in that open space. Down below these open resources, for the fisheries, for example, the authors of those videos chose the more restrictive licenses because it was their knowledge, and the licensing process of ownership of knowledge was up to them as well. So opening that process to them was a very eye-opening and very powerful event. So the ways that we use language, the ways we situate learning, and transform provision into authorship can really make a huge impact on how we do learning in digital spaces. It's no longer just a lecture in a lecture theater where everyone's madly taking notes. There's a lot of different ways that people can interact and utilize the technologies that we have to access and have learning being open to them and their circumstances. So how we use open educational practices, or just open practices, allows us to perform our technical and professional duties, to communicate in the communities and cultures that we live and work in. We can apply open review and sharing in our offices. We share tips on how to format documents. We peer review and informal peer review each other's work. We work on things collaborative in workplaces. So some of these theories of making sure that we're doing things in situ and making sure that we're taking ownership over some places digitally that I just shared with you really directly apply to how we actually do our work, and some of the work job readiness criteria that we're being expected to really fold into a lot of our teaching and learning delivery. We can also incorporate open practices with culturally informed perspectives. So some people may have very different ideas about what a workplace culture might be, and every workplace has its own culture. So we're not just speaking about the cultural competencies that we teach in this unit, but we're also discussing ways that work culture is a thing. So, how we developed the unit. We redeveloped this particular unit as the kind of the flagship unit that we worked on, the Cultural Capabilities Unit. We sat down with Ian Gumbala, Rosemary Gundaramboy, Mercy, Stephen, and Joy Bulkonoy to work on this framework that they developed for us, and a series of little mini messages for the students about how to be in a cultural way. How do you move through the world? And so these are really transferable messages, but also there's a lot of deep learning that has created the backbone for this unit. So as senior cultural authorities themselves, I sat down with them and a few other colleagues for a week before we moved into developing the rest of the unit, and had a lot of really in-depth discussions about what that might mean, and from their perspective, ways that we need to work towards cultural capabilities, but also working together, building trust and teamwork, practicing your culture when it comes to language, stories, ceremonies, and rules and laws. Belong to so there was a lot of really, really deep, wonderful knowledge that they shared with us, and that provided a real lovely backbone for the unit, and helped us collaboratively design the foundation for it together. After which we moved on and chose a bunch of Western academic and other diverse materials, literacies and digital skills and assessment items to then complement the significant contribution that we continue to center and privilege here. We had another unit called Indigenous Australia. This unit analyzes public and political representations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia, and the narratives in the public sphere. We do a little bit of discussion around representation from the beginning of colonization of Australia to systemic injustices that are present in public cultural like Australian sports. And we then transfer that knowledge into an understanding of what political representation might look like and the implications for contemporary Australia now. So that is generating some amazing conversations and understandings in the students that enroll in that unit. And we're making these things open to students as well in these other two units, Northern Exposure and Northern Futures. But we're also mentioning, again, going back to digital literacies and open practices, as well as knowledge authority, contextual immersion, situating learning in realistic places, as well as enabling students to really participate and take charge of things. We've given students an opportunity to really engage in what the people policy in place of Northern Australia offers us in terms of culture, in terms of stories and community characters, but also what happens here in terms of refugee and detention centers, immigrant populations. We have lots of guest lectures on northern policy sectors like Indigenous fire management from Rohan Fisher, disaster management from our wonderful Thrive Lab, coastal livelihoods, mining, remote health, and education. And the students then spend a bit of time after they've associated with the people of the region with the actual frameworks and policy documents and data sets that they're going to have to be familiar with if they work in the region or in any regional area. So that's opening them to local knowledge authorities and local knowledge, and local frameworks, and real life things. Gateways to Asia in the second class of Northern Future, the defense garrison, the tyranny of distance, the wicked problems and tourism and infrastructure, all very relevant to a number of different schools of thought and colleges and discipline backgrounds. So it's not just helpful for students who are studying pure humanities degrees. We've got a lot of engineering students who could really benefit from engaging in a bit of critical thinking around infrastructure projects and how it might impact on other levels of our society in regional areas. A bit more about the situated practice. We use a lot of the discussion board for students to kind of claim it as their own. You can see here that students have shared the drafts of their work as a peer review. And a lot of students down on the right-hand side have all started to kind of contribute feedback based on the criteria for them. So they've create this little community of practice on the discussion board based on these assignments that are also based on real things. They're final reports, so they have a choice to discuss Kakadu mining and racism against Aboriginal people in Mildura during this one event a couple of years ago, and of course, anti-Asian discrimination as a result of COVID. So we make sure that those kind of situated, realistic assessment items help them relate their knowledge to what they observe and what they're experiencing in the world, but we also give them a space to kind of claim and collaborate and work cooperatively on a digital platform. Sharmila Pagajira, wonderful IT industry rep who's agreed with a number of other engineering science industry reps to start little videos that we're going to be supporting different discipline students with. So we've got the Engineering, IT, and Science College we've been working quite closely with, giving them another way, open way in to open the learning that they do about this kind of broad abstract ideas. For some disciplines, it becomes a little bit of a challenge. So we want to make that learning as open as possible, respect the knowledge that they have, but also introduce them to a number of ways to author their knowledge and respect the knowledge authority of others and where they're going to be headed in their workplace. So we've got some videos of people talking about the cultural skills they use, and Sharmila talks about that from an IT perspective. I also have a number of links on the discussion board to share with students for links to race and technology and some of the research that's coming out of the surveillance technologies areas that are happening that might be really, really interesting to some students. Self-driving cars studies, for example. But we're doing this for accounting and business, and we're doing it for all the students that take this unit from across all the colleges. So that leans towards a bit more about industry in involvement and being open to what industry has to say about what students should be able to do. I also make sure they have their professional codes of conduct available to them so we can link to those documents and literatures as well. Some other OEP that we do, I polled a bunch of students when we first went into lockdown to ask, how would you like that online delivery? With 500 students every semester, it's it's kind of hard to manage and try and hit them all at the same time. We have a scheduled lecture once a week, but not everyone can make that lecture. So there's this blend that we have between synchronous and asynchronous delivery. So we still have a lecture. We have a tutorial where we workshop the assignments and the drafts that they've shared and their little community of practice. And we model using criteria and, you know, kind of keep backing yourself and being able to talk about criteria, like selection criteria for applying for jobs. It's the same kind of practice. We're really encouraging them to be involved in their learning from the bottom up. But also, we polled students to ask them, you know, would you like a lecture, or would you like mini lectures, or would you like a mix of all three, or all two? And so it was really lovely to have their input, and they felt seen. They felt appreciated, that they have families at home. They were in lockdown. They were doing homeschooling. Everyone had to start learning from home and working at home. And so we really wanted to take the pressure off people and meet them where they were. So these led to these little reading for purpose mini clips and mini lectures that are like 10-minute potted versions of the long lecture. And we, of course, we say, don't rely just on those. You can always go to the longer lecture and have a listen if you don't, if you want to go deeper, if you can't make it. But not everyone can sit through an hour lecture or a 2-hour-long recording when they've got family and commitments and so on and so forth. So we just give those students all different ways into their learning, like the definition of open practice, multitude of ways of learning shared with them, so that, you know, out of those 500 students, maximum 50 students actually show up to the live lecture. So we have to think about the 450 other students, and how are they going to access that learning if they can't make it to that recording? We also have an open textbook of students that have wanted to publish their work, budding journalists and communication experts and people that just love writing. They have published some of their work. And so we're going to kind of keep adding to that. And we've got some project ideas with the business and accounting students as well to really beef that process up. So the way that I did this as a research project was make it a developmental evaluation. Now, evaluation is a really great method and methodology because it's very practical, and people use evaluation to research educational programs and all kinds of government programs. So it's a really straightforward kind of process. Nice thing about developmental evaluation is it bakes in everything into the development as you go. So it's not just an end of program evaluation. You actually get a chance to use stakeholder and participant input to keep shaping and refining and making things really rigorous, but very well developed and well-rounded. So the shame about, you know, these summative evaluations at the end of a program is that it sometimes gives it a report and it meets the criteria, meets a KPI, but sometimes it doesn't always correct anything that you could have had worked on in the process. So every semester I evaluated using those principles of knowledge authority, authorship, consensus, language use, collaboration, situated context immersion, and cultural interfaces. I used all that kind of thinking as well as digital and academic literacies, the workforce readiness criteria, I'll show you in a second, UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning Principles. It's how you present content on a screen, as well as online course design packages from around the world. And I also studied unit content and processes, student evaluation comments, and some more examples that I have ethical clearance to use. So really happy to have all that lovely data, and I'm continuing on this semester. The last semester I get to gather some data. So I'm going to be analyzing those last two pieces of data, samples and evaluations for more in-depth findings. With those examples in mind, I then went into the fact that, you know, the unit that I was using is a 100-200 level. So I had to think about whether or not the learning outcomes and the AQF levels were were being met and justified enough by how we were designing and communicating with all those students online. Pardon me, the next few slides are really text heavy, but I just want to give you an impression of all the different criteria I was using to make sure I was meeting the bigger principles of openness and digital literacies and workforce development. Pardon me, this is a little bit too big, but the mental and cognitive health of students, this is generally an issue these days. We also needed more text and accessibility scoring. We needed to make sure that students' expectations were met with a bit of, addressing. Like, students have some desire to have a lot more one-to-one feedback, but in a class of 500 students, that's not always feasible. So we had to give them space for that need for feedback, without the one-to-one designs. Marking is always going to be a complaint for students, but we have ways to kind of address that. Links to their different sectors, and so I've gone through these columns to say, here's the issue, here's what needs to happen, here's what I'll try and do in the future. So I did that for a number of different criteria, such as the digital and information literacy. So that digital literacy from JISC was one category, but then there's also information and web literacy, knowing that just Googling something from a web page is not going to be the same academically or rigor-wise as doing a proper search and using a few criteria to make sure that you understand what is a good source of information. So there's content presentation and the blend again of practices, educational pedagogies, the fact that we have content expertise, but we also have this delivery discipline itself, this making sure we do online learning in a really comprehensive and rigorous way so that we're meeting all of this, not just delivering content, but we're actually involving students in their learning on this learning management system. All right, I won't go through all of these things, but I'll slow down a little bit because I've kind of tried to move through, but this is where things really, the rubber really hits the road. The Australian Industry and Skills Committee, the Government Department of Jobs and Small Business, 21st Century Learning, Digital Literacies, JISC, and a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers all listed these as job-ready criteria. These overlap a lot with the criteria listed in the INPILF report that I mentioned on one of the first slides about the kind of things we're going to need to be able to do in order to be job ready. So when you think about these skills and some of the key words here, have you noticed any kind of commonalities between what the definition of open educational practices are, or how students have been working and collaborating and active, positive thinking, lifelong learning, self-drivenness, connectedness, being collaborative, problem solving, thinking critically, information literacy, all these things that are really good job-ready skills from all these different organizations and departments are also things that we're doing in the pedagogies of how we're delivering and managing the unit. Additionally, too, the Alpha Beta report on future skills also lists these things. So the two columns on the left are things that we are really trying to cultivate and we're trying to encourage students to do. On the right-hand side, there's still a few things there that we aren't covering necessarily in the unit. But as I said, there's so many sets of criteria that we can start to map the skills that open practices cultivate, the skills that the Indigenous Knowledge Authorities and YOLMA lecturers were talking about, as well as the workforce development criteria. So there's a really nice overlap between those three kinds of skill sets. So getting back again to the digital literacies, People are being innovative and scholarly across digital spaces in this unit. We're encouraging them to find really good sources of information and to question what they see on their multimedia, on their little phone screens, and on what they see in really contentious time in history, folks, isn't it? Like, there's a lot of stuff happening culturally around the world, especially in the last 2 years while we were while we were renovating and refining this curriculum. So we had some very juicy conversations with students during tutorials, but it was really helpful to show them all this and to share with them that these are actual skills that you're going to need. So you might have strong opinions and you might have reactions to some of the things that are happening around us, but we've got to talk about them in professional ways. And we've got to be able to manage information in a number of ways. And the more you can collaborate together and share learning practices that are socially interactive, we're creating knowledge, we're doing peer learning and shared learning, then we're doing lots of really good open practices in our daily work. So I'm going to ask some questions in the student evaluations. And here's a nice word cloud that came out of some of that. Students were asked, what are the best aspects of this unit? Can you elaborate, or more critical responses? Please comment on anything. You know, how we use the platform. We really wanted to know what else they needed or what else they liked or didn't like about what we were kind of developing with them. And when I say we, I just want to put a big shout out right now. I forgot to mention this. From the beginning of last year, we've had the wonderful Dr. Christiana Bambacas working with us to help refine the communication with all these students and the systems of interacting with them and how we've managed the unit so far. And just recently, we've got Dr. Isaac Akande from Illinois, who is hopefully going to make it to Australia sooner rather than later to join us on campus here. But he's been working with us as well, bringing a lot of really brilliant content knowledge. But you know, I'd like to really acknowledge Christiana for having helped roll out the newer, more earlier versions of this unit, and to work just the two of us there trying to make sure that this learning and the big changes in the learning went smoothly. So we had some really interesting feedback, and I just want to spend, we've got 5 more slides and then just all feedback. But I wanted to acknowledge too that not every student thought it was wonderful feedback as well. So I've highlighted some keywords from some of the more scathing comments that have come, but the fact that a midwifery student considered that culturally speaking, there is more relevant topics for them to be learning, and considering that person was going to be a midwife, potentially with placements in RDH here in Darwin, makes me wonder how relevance might be measured there. So instead of feeling damaged by these comments, I actually tried to lean in a little bit to understand what it was coming from, like a science-based degree in the next comment, considering very practical skills, didn't see the value of the unit. And I'm wondering again, what practicality means to that person. And the final point there on the slide, calling it a snowflake course, and the fact that they have never used white privilege. We discuss white privilege as a concept, and we try and cushion the blow for a lot of students to say, look, it's, you know, being biased is a natural human process. Not acknowledging that you have privilege is a natural thing because you can't see what yeah. I'm being that you're clumsy when I word that, but we're trying to make this as palatable as possible and as non-threatening as possible, but some students still found the materials challenging in these types of ways. So that's given us a lot of material to keep refining with. On to more positive notes. An immigrant to Australia, this unit educated me to understand a shift without losing my own identity, purposeful behavior academically and professionally, collaboratively, an open and safe space. So this is really wonderful to have someone who's new arrival to Australia a lot of this critical thinking and the Western pedagogies of reflection and what you think and these types of things that are kind of higher up on that Bloom's taxonomy, the thinking levels, they're not as rote learning as some of the exams that a lot of our students who are coming from different cultural and or educational or disciplinary backgrounds are used to. So this kind of critical engagement is a really new thing for a lot of students. Be able to talk about what they think is also very challenging and confronting. So it's very nice to see comments like this. Someone's actually acknowledged that the questions and opinions may have been actually less in a face-to-face classroom. And having taught this class in a big lecture theater, people are a lot less likely to speak up. But if they're behind a screen, they're more likely to participate, put something in the chat. And so thanks to Christiana getting the conversation started a lot. She's really fantastic at that. And Isaac's been amazing with sharing a few very, very good provocations, getting students to participate. People with new IT skills, by building a unit based on a sense of trust. I thought that was a really lovely comment. Some students have said my time management and delegation skills, I'm independent and confident. These are all workforce and readiness, isn't it? I'm not always actively engaged during class, but online education has afforded me anonymity and simultaneously included me to achieve the learning. So we have this saying in online learning called lurking is learning, and it doesn't make people contribute, but it really helps people feel comfortable behind their screens. If they're not outward or feel a little shy, then they can start to kind of feel like they can contribute, and they can maybe comment something on the discussion board. They don't have to participate all the time in those discussions. So that's really, really lovely to see some of that feedback. I also have started to gather some of the data in terms of how we organize the content. So this is lovely. I loved opening each week to see what was included. The tutorials, the 10-minute clips, the variety was incredible. The weekly recordings I found so enjoyable, helped me to be more engaged. Interactions on the discussion board, benefited from my classmates' openness and opinions, which may have been less face-to-face. Without online, I would not have been able to study at all. Teaching materials provided through this unit helped me empower my critical thinking. Learning online has been challenging, but overall helpful. Diverse group of people online, reading other students' work has shown me different perspectives I might not have learned. So again, there's a really interesting finding that just this last semester, at the very end of the semester, we had 350 students submitted their final assignment, and only 3 academic integrity issues came up. So you might think that sharing work is a bit of a questionable practice, but we're talking about drafts, and we workshop them in the class. And as a result of that, the rates of academic breaches, integrity breaches have actually dropped significantly. So there's something else in there that I'm going to be looking into. Really wonderful. Oh, almost done. So I've got 2 more slides. Job-specific skills that students have identified. Communication on sensitive topics can be achieved in a safe space. It's helped me identify my privileges as being a male and to generate interactions with my colleagues in my engineering profession. Isn't that wonderful? My IT career, my male-dominated industry, used my privilege in a humanitarian field to promote equity and to recognize the power relations existing in health service interactions. So another nursing and midwifery student probably had something else to say. Finally, some really nice affective responses. This is a student that says, this is an achievement which feels more than just a mark. I have not overset it because when I can implement them in real life, I feel a satisfaction of wellness. This is beautiful. I will use the knowledge I leave this semester to help me create culturally safe spaces in my classroom as a teacher. And working in Aboriginal health means that I will have to better understand the culture and to stop myself from assuming that I know everything. And isn't that a wonderful way to help students understand that they have the ability to bring skills with them, but that again, that's creating nice space for the knowledge authority in the intersecting systems that they work in. They can see and relate the learning of these big concepts. I mean, we're talking about power relationships and white privilege and all these kind of big confronting issues like bias. And they can stop and think about them as concepts that they can relate to and work with in professional and academic settings. So I'm really happy that they can then experience the joys of occupying that digital spaces with us, and then contribute to a little bit more capabilities when they go on working and learning with other people. So I've just gone to 45 minutes. I can't believe I made it. I'm sorry if I rushed those first few bits, but lots of information there that I've tried to roll into the story of where this all came from. I'm going to be continuing to do some more analysis. There's my Twitter handle and my email if you want to hit me up and have a chat or discuss any more. I'm also very open to people participating and sharing their views. So anyone out there in the community who has experience in non-governmental organizations or industry or other disciplines, I'm very open to participating and inviting you in for some of these little videos that share with students what life might be like in the workforce. And if you're interested in GoGN, that's the website there for anyone who's interested in this open research. But yes, I think it's time to have a chat.
Thanks, Johanna. I think you did very well. You covered quite a lot in that period of time. So well done.
Thank you.
We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A box, and I just encourage anyone, if you've got a question, to please use the Q&A bubble down the bottom of your screen. The first question I have is from Carolyn, and her question is, reading for purpose mini clips. A little more on this, please.
Yes, I'm very happy to answer that. Carolyn, nice to see you here. So those reading for purpose clips, let me just see. What I do is I downloaded I'm sorry about the flicking. I downloaded the readings into my Microsoft Edge, and I annotated them and highlighted them. And I showed students how, when as academics, it's a very different kind of reading. We need to read for a purpose. We need to do that academic literacy of finding the stuff in the article that's really going to help back up our analysis of a situation. So we chose the readings in a really nice way, but I just do these little mini clips, and I show them how to, again, locate the reading itself in the library database. I mean, students are so used to electronic and digital media feeding them. And so one distinction that I wanted to make with it's a wonderful tools that we do have, but I wanted to help the students understand that they need to go and seek out information. And so rather than being fed, they needed to go and find the reading, and they have to do that in a number of different ways. And then ways to understand it, I would go through, and as you can see, this is a little screenshot of a video with me just chatting through some of the ways that the authors organize their information, and ways that you can, practice referencing. And also, citation for a purpose. It's not just a shallow so-and-so, I'll put someone's name in my paragraph and that means I've done some referencing. We go a little bit deeper into understanding that acknowledging people have done a lot of work before us here. So, you have to kind of understand what an author is saying and then be able to have a discussion with that author's article in their work. So that's turned out to be a real success. I hope that answers your question, Caroline.
Excellent. And there's another question, Johanna, from Don.
Yeah, has there been many challenges or barriers to engagement raised by students involved in these courses? Is there places for students to go when they have trouble accessing the digital tools? Yep. What I do is I have a video at the beginning of every unit, and I don't actually put it in the unit. I send it and share it with all the students, and I give them a little tour of how to navigate the unit, because a lot of us teaching staff have units, they all look very different. So that's a digital overwhelm, number one. I'm sure everyone's aware too of the Zoom gaze that started to happen as a result of everyone doing online meetings and learning. So we try to keep the extra stuff to a minimum because students already have that overload in the first couple of weeks. They can come to us. We've got a central email, but we also have phone times. We have office hours. We said anytime, you know, if you prefer a chat, you can. Students who prefer the face-to-face classes can still enroll in that too. I'm not saying that this is the panacea for the rest of time. People still like to have an experience, and that's completely valid too. But we also have ALSP, and we also have, which is the Academic Language and Learning Program. So if we're noticing students are falling behind with their language or their structures, there's ways that they can workshop that. We have the PASS sessions with a peer-assisted success program. So it's another student, but a more senior student, helps them through their assignments. And if we notice that students haven't been checking in to the unit, then we do have a system where we flag that with progression, and we try and make sure with 500 students that we try and get everyone. So I hope that answered your question, Doug.
I think we actually have a question in the chat.
Yeah, I saw some up there. Yeah, I can see that. Okay, starting from the top. Thanks, Nathan. Comparative studies with other nations. Oh, okay, thanks for that question, Nathan. That's really valid. I was actually talking to Katrina before the session, and I said I've actually done a lot of these presentations for the last few years with the global network that I've said, with the member of the Canadian Open Technology and Education Online Learning Association, as well as the ALT in the UK. So I've been going to those conferences for a number of years in the US and Canada and the UK since 2014, actually, talking about this. So that we're actually, we've got the tools in Australia, but we are actually a little bit far behind in terms of practices. I mean, there are people in North America and the UK who are using a lot more sophisticated practices and more openness at a bigger scale than what we're doing here. I mean, they like the fact that I'm using culturally informed practices, but a lot of that has informed my work in this unit. I hope that answers your question.
And there was another one from Carolyn down the bottom about Camtasia.
Okay, so yeah, sometimes I use Camtasia, but because Ultra, the collaborate session sometimes doesn't work, so sometimes I use Teams. Teams is helpful because when I have a meeting, I can just set up a meeting with myself or anyone that I'm having a chat with. I mean, Rohan Fisher and I had a session on fire management, and we just met in Teams, and it downloaded to my SharePoint in the portal. And then I could edit it in Camtasia if I wanted to. So there's all different ways that you can create videos. There's also an app called Flipgrid, which is an open app. You can put it on your phone. It's kind of like VoiceThread, but it's not in the system. It's an open tool, so students can do little mini vlogs and that kind of thing, and you can share a link to it in the discussion board. There's all kinds of ways that you can make videos. Shorter recordings, yeah. So I think the one I did for the reading clip was in Camtasia, but I have to make sure that the format's suitable for ShareStream, because the new version of our LearnLine Collaborate in Ultra, as well as the older version, only can use ShareStream, which is helpful for students with the low data allowance as well. So the ShareStream, but I mean, we make sure we do little things as well, like making lectures downloadable and making sure that they can, you know, kind of access materials without having to use all their data. So we do some digitally inclusive stuff like that. So I have a couple more minutes. Does anyone else want to say anything? Oh, mini clips. We're live with students. Okay. I haven't yet done that. We record the tutorials. So we have a lecture recording, and then we make a separate recording as well of the tutorials. So when we have all this mixture of learning materials in the unit, we have the little videos in the learning materials, we've got the message from the Yolngu lecturers, and we have the readings and the other complementary materials that help students access it. Then in the online classroom, we do a proper formal lecture because we still really like it. We make all our PowerPoints available ahead of time. They like to kind of, sometimes people like to print those out and scribble on it and keep their notes in a hard copy. And then we have a separate recording where we do a tutorial where we workshop bits of the assignment. So we actually work on the assignments in installments every week, applying the reading, applying the conceptual knowledge, the digital, academic, and workforce kind of capabilities all bundled into one. And we got our skates on, but it's a really rigorous kind of process that we make sure students can then access those recordings. I think an hour is still too long. Ideally, we could have them even in smaller bite sizes. But you can also, you can encourage students to kind of skip through sections, and they can see on their stream, skim through the video kind of tool. I forgot what those called. Whether or not they actually have got to a point of where workshopping the different assignments can be helpful to them. So.
Okay, so I think we've come to the end of the questions, and what I've done is that I've added Johanna's contact email in the chat if anyone wants to contact her.
I'll just flick forward to the end.
Yeah, because you have a Twitter handle.
I've got a Twitter handle that I've got a lot of friends around the world on Twitter who do the same kind of work, who are wonderful, wonderful leaders in the field. And it's actually one of the friendliest Twitter communities I've ever heard of. So do take a look.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Johanna, for presenting for us today, and everyone joining us today. As I've said, you can find out more about Johanna's work through her CDU research profile, which is on the CDU research portal. That's researchers.cdu.edu.au. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you.